Rich boss throws food at Maid. Then what she least expected happens. Patricia Wilson never imagined that a special dinner to impress important investors would turn into the day that changed her life forever. The 42-year-old woman, used to having everything under control in her mansion in the upscale neighborhood of Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, felt something was different that Thursday night. The fine porcelain plate flew through the kitchen air and hit Margaret Johnson's face, splashing tomato sauce and bits of gnocchi all over her impeccable gray uniform. The boss was furious because the salt had been overdone, ruining the main dish meant for the representatives of an American business group. 20 years working here and you can't even make decent gnocchi, shouted Patricia, her eyes blazing with anger. How am I supposed to explain this to the investors? Margaret stood still, feeling the sauce drip down her face as silent tears mixed with the food. At 58, she had witnessed many difficult moments in that house, but something different shone in her eyes this time. It wasn't fear or resignation. It was a mix of deep sadness and a determination she couldn't quite explain. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Patricia," said Margaret, her voice trembling, wiping her face with her apron. "I'll prepare another dish right away." "No, it's too late now." Patricia slammed her hand on the marble counter. "The guests arrive in an hour, and you've ruined everything." Near the kitchen door, Richard Smith, the family's driver for 15 years, watched the scene with outrage. Discreetly, he took out his phone and started recording. It wasn't the first time he'd seen Margaret being humiliated, but this time, something inside him told him it had to be documented. Patricia's teenage daughter, Emma, 17, rushed downstairs upon hearing the shouts. Seeing the scene, she froze in the doorway, watching the maid wipe her face with dignity. "Mom, what happened?" asked Emma, stepping closer to Margaret with concern. "Nothing that concerns you," Patricia replied sharply. "Margaret, clean up this mess and make sandwiches. At least you can manage that without ruining it." Margaret nodded and began picking up the broken plate pieces. Emma approached and whispered something in her ear that made her shudder. "Mrs. Margaret, you don't deserve this. I know things about our family that my mother doesn't realize I know." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The maid looked at the girl in surprise, but didn't have time to ask anything. Patricia had stormed out of the kitchen, fuming, leaving them alone. Richard quickly put away his phone and stepped forward. "Mrs. Margaret, are you okay?" asked the driver, offering a clean cloth. "I'm fine, Richard. Thank you," she replied, still thoughtful about Emma's words. That night, the dinner was a disaster. The improvised sandwiches didn't impress the American investors, who left the Wilson home with a negative impression of the family's organization. Patricia publicly blamed Margaret in front of the guests, deepening the humiliation. After everyone had left, Margaret retreated to her small room at the back of the house. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't prepare the tray of chamomile tea that Patricia drank every night before bed. Instead, she sat on her narrow bed and stared at an old photo she kept on her nightstand. The image showed two identical girls, about 5 years old, wearing the same blue dress and smiling at the camera. One of the girls had a small scrape on her knee, while the other held her hand tenderly. Margaret ran her fingers over the worn photograph and sighed deeply. "She doesn't know who I am," she murmured to herself. "After all these years, she really doesn't know." The next morning, Patricia woke up surprised by the absence of the fresh coffee aroma that usually filled her room. She went down to the kitchen and found Richard preparing breakfast. "Where's Margaret?" she asked irritably. "She asked for the day off, Mrs. Patricia. Said she wasn't feeling well," Richard replied, avoiding direct eye contact. "Day off?" Patricia nearly choked on her coffee. "In 20 years, she's never asked for a day off." "Well, there's a first time for everything, right?" Richard remarked, setting toast on the table. Patricia felt a tightness in her chest. She didn't know if it was guilt or just irritation, but something deeply unsettled her. Margaret had always been there, available, devoted. She was like part of the house's structure, like the walls or the ceiling. The idea that she might simply not show up one day had never crossed her employer's mind. During lunch with her socialite friends at the neighborhood club, Patricia tried to focus on the conversation about a new Italian designer collection, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the scene from the night before. Then her phone rang, signaling a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood ran cold. It was a video of the kitchen incident, filmed from an angle that clearly showed her face as she threw the plate at Margaret. Along with the video was a message: 48 hours to make things right or this goes public. "Patricia, you're pale. What's wrong?" asked her best friend, Barbara Thompson, a woman in her 60s who had known the Wilson family for decades. "Nothing, just a headache," Patricia lied, trying to process what she'd just seen. Barbara leaned over and caught a glimpse of the video before Patricia could close her phone. "Wait, isn't that your housekeeper?" she asked with a strange expression. "Margaret Johnson? You know her name?" Patricia was surprised. "Of course I do. She looks so much like—" Barbara stopped mid-sentence, as if realizing something. "Patricia, have you never asked about her past?" "Why would I? She's an employee, not a family friend," Patricia replied, but something in Barbara's tone unsettled her. "Are you sure that's all there is to it?" Barbara pressed, nervously fiddling with her napkin. "Because I swear I've seen that woman somewhere before she worked in your house." A chill ran down Patricia's spine. Barbara had an excellent memory for faces and rarely made mistakes. She excused herself quickly and headed home, determined to find out more about Margaret Johnson. When she arrived at the mansion, she found Emma sitting in the living room scrolling through her phone. "Where's Margaret?" she asked her daughter. "She hasn't come back yet. Said she was going for a walk downtown," Emma replied without looking up. "Mum, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why do you treat Mrs. Margaret like that? She's such a kind person." Patricia felt a wave of irritation mixed with confusion. "Emma, she's our housekeeper. I pay her salary, so I expect her to do her job properly." "But she does, Mum. She's done everything right for 20 years. Yesterday was just a mistake." Emma finally looked at her mother seriously. "Have you ever stopped to think that maybe she has a life outside of here? Problems? Worries? Since when do you care so much about this?" Emma hesitated for a moment, then decided to be honest. "Since I found out some things about our family that you never told me." Patricia Wilson's heart raced. "What kind of things?" "Things about Grandpa Robert, about the time he lived in Silver Lake, about a woman named Helen Johnson who worked for him." Patricia felt her legs go weak. She hadn't heard that name in years. "How did you find out?" "I found some old letters in the attic. Letters Grandpa wrote but never sent. And guess what Mrs. Margaret's last name is?" Patricia's world began to spin. Johnson. Margaret Johnson. How had she never made the connection before? "Emma, show me those letters, now." The two climbed up to the attic, a dusty space filled with old furniture and cardboard boxes. Emma went straight to a specific box and pulled out a yellowed envelope. "Read it," she said simply. Patricia opened the letter with trembling hands. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable, as was the date, January 15th, 1965. "My dear Helen, I know I can't change what happened. I know separating the girls was the hardest decision of my life, but Patricia needs a future I can only give to one of them. Margaret will grow up strong and independent like you. One day when they're adults, I'll tell them the truth. I promise one day they'll meet as sisters." The letter fell from Patricia's hands. Margaret. Her housekeeper was her twin sister. "Mom?" Emma held her mother's arm, worried by her extreme paleness. How did you know she was—" "I saw a photo in her room last week when she asked me to get some medicine from her closet. A photo of two identical girls. One of them looked just like you in the old childhood pictures I have." Patricia rushed downstairs, crossed the house, and went straight to the maid's quarters in the back. She opened the door without knocking and frantically searched until she found the photograph on the nightstand. There they were. Two 5-year-old girls, identical, smiling at the camera. One with a scraped knee, the other holding her hand. Patricia remembered that day perfectly. They had fought over a toy, and she had pushed her sister, who fell and got hurt. Later, full of remorse, she had tended to the wound and asked their mother to take a picture of them together. "Margaret," she whispered her sister's name like a prayer. Suddenly, she heard footsteps at the front of the house. Margaret had arrived. Patricia stood frozen, clutching the photograph with trembling hands. How could she face the woman she had humiliated for 2 decades, now knowing she was her own sister? Margaret entered the room and found Patricia standing there, the photo in her hand. For a moment, the two stared at each other in absolute silence. "You always knew, didn't you?" Patricia asked, her voice hoarse. "Always," Margaret replied calmly, closing the door behind her. "From the first day I came here." "Then why? Why did you agree to work here? Why did you endure all of it?" Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and sighed deeply. "Because after our father died, I found out where you lived. I learned he had given you everything and left me nothing but the address of this house in a sealed letter." She paused, looking at her hands. "I wanted to know you, Patricia. I wanted to understand why he chose you. Margaret, I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I know you didn't. Our father protected you from the truth, just as he protected me from you." Margaret took the photo from her sister's hands. "He was afraid you'd reject me if you knew we were sisters. So I decided to come here as a maid, to watch you, to understand who you'd become." Patricia broke into sobs. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you endure all the humiliation?" "Because I saw you'd become someone I didn't recognize. The kind little girl who tended to my scraped knee had turned into someone who threw food in people's faces." Margaret stood up and walked to the window. "I hoped one day you would remember, that you'd recognize me, that you'd ask about my past, but that never happened. Margaret, forgive me. Please forgive me. It's not just about forgiveness, Patricia. It's about who you chose to be. For 20 years, you treated me as if I were invisible, as if I weren't human. And it wasn't just me. I saw how you treat Richard, how you treat the other cleaning staff, how you treat anyone you consider beneath you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Patricia's phone rang. It was a call from her lawyer. "Mrs. Patricia, I need to see you urgently. We've received some important documents related to your father's inheritance." "What documents?" asked Patricia, looking at Margaret. "It's better we talk in person. Can you come to the office now?" Patricia hung up and turned to Margaret. "Did you send documents to my lawyer?" "I sent copies of the papers our father left with me, including the original will, not the version you know." "What do you mean by that?" "It means you inherited this house and half of the business. I inherited the other half of the business and some properties you don't even know exist, but I never claimed my share." Patricia felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. You're my business partner?" "Technically, I always have been. I just never exercised my rights." Margaret turned to face her sister. "Until now." "What does this mean?" "It means I'm tired of waiting, tired of being treated as worthless by my own sister." Margaret picked up a folder from the dresser. "Last night, after you threw food at me, I made a decision. I'm taking my share in the family business." Patricia was in shock. In just a few hours, her life had been turned completely upside down. The maid she had humiliated was her twin sister, and on top of that, her partner in the family business. "Margaret, we can talk about this. We can find a solution. I've tried talking to you for 20 years, Patricia. Every time I asked if you needed anything beyond housework, every time I tried to build a human connection with you, I was ignored." Margaret tucked the photo into the folder. "Now we'll talk as businesswomen." At that moment, Emma knocked on the door. "Mom? Mrs. Margaret? Dad's back from his trip and is asking for you." James Wilson, Patricia's husband, had returned from a business trip to San Francisco. When he saw the two women leaving the maid's room with serious expressions, he was puzzled. "Patricia? Did something happen?" "James, we need to talk. You, me, and Margaret." "Margaret?" James looked at the maid in confusion. "Of course, but about what?" "About the fact that she's my sister and a partner in the family business." James nearly stumbled over his own feet. "What do you mean, sister? Patricia, what are you talking about?" "It's a long story, James," Margaret interjected, "but I think it's time for all the truths to come out." The four of them gathered in the main room of the house. Margaret told the whole story. how Robert Wilson had fallen in love with Helen Johnson, a young housemaid, how identical twins were born from that union, how he was pressured by his wealthy family to make a choice, either publicly acknowledge the relationship and lose his inheritance, or separate the girls and give a prosperous future to only one of them. Our father chose to give me to a wealthy adoptive family, but my adoptive mother passed away when I was 10. I ended up back with my birth mother, Helen, who raised me with great love, but in modest conditions. Margaret spoke calmly, but the pain in her voice was unmistakable. When I turned 18, he came to me and gave me a letter explaining everything, along with documents proving my right to the inheritance. "But why didn't you claim your rights sooner?" asked James. "Because he asked me to wait until Patricia turned 30. He said she needed to mature first, but when I came looking for her, I realized she hadn't changed. She was still the spoiled girl she'd always been." Patricia was silent, absorbing every word. "So you decided to work here as a maid to watch me?" "Exactly. I thought that maybe by living with me daily you'd remember me, that something would spark your memory or curiosity." Margaret smiled sadly. "But you never saw me as a person. To you, I was just a role." James looked at his wife disapprovingly. "Patricia, how many times have I told you to treat the staff better? James, you don't understand the situation." "I do understand. And I understand that Margaret has every right to claim her share of the inheritance. In fact, I think she should have done it long ago." Emma, who had listened quietly, stepped closer to Margaret. "Mrs. Margaret. I mean, Aunt Margaret. I always knew there was something special about you. The way you cared for everything with such love as if this house were yours." "In part, it always was, dear," Margaret replied, stroking the girl's face. "You're my niece, and I've always been proud to watch you grow, even if I couldn't acknowledge our relationship." The house phone rang. It was Barbara, Patricia's friend. "Patricia, I need to tell you something. I couldn't stop thinking about your maid. I remembered where I'd seen her before." Barbara spoke quickly. "In the 80s, when your father was sick, I saw him a few times with a woman who looked just like her at Union Square. They always talked on the same bench. I thought it was odd because she didn't seem like his employee. They seemed very close. Barbara, I just found out she's my sister." "Your sister? What do you mean?" "It's a long story, I'll tell you later." After hanging up, Patricia looked at Margaret with new eyes. "You met with our father at Union Square?" "Yes, once a month during the last years of his life. He told me about you, about Emma, about how the family was doing. He said he wanted you to know the truth but was afraid of how you'd react." Margaret sighed. "The last time we saw each other, 3 days before he passed, he told me he'd left a letter for you explaining everything. But apparently that letter never reached you." "What letter?" "It's with the documents I sent to your lawyer." James stood up firmly. "Let's all go to the lawyer's office now. I need to understand the exact legal situation here." The law office was in downtown Los Angeles in an old but well-kept building. Mr. Howard Bennett, the family's lawyer for 15 years, greeted them with a serious expression. "Mrs. Patricia, the documents I received today completely changed my understanding of your father's inheritance." He opened a thick folder. "Here's the original will, not the simplified copy you knew." James took the document and began reading aloud. "I leave the family home to my daughter, Patricia Wilson. I leave 50% of the family business to Patricia and 50% to Margaret Johnson, my biological daughter. I also leave to Margaret the 3 commercial properties in Silver Lake and the savings account at National Trust Bank, branch 1547. 3 commercial properties." Patricia looked at Margaret in shock. "What properties?" "A restaurant, a clothing store, and a small office building," Margaret replied. "All rented out. The monthly income is enough for me to live comfortably without needing to work as a maid." "So why did I keep working in your house? Because I hoped that one day you'd discover who I was and accept me as your sister." Margaret looked directly into Patricia's eyes. "But now I realize that will never happen naturally." The lawyer continued explaining the legal situation. Margaret was entitled not only to her share of the inheritance, but also to an active role in the family's business. This included the import company James managed, which was the primary source of income for the Wilsons. In practical terms, Mr. Howard explained, Margaret can demand involvement in business decisions and access to all the company's financial records. James swallowed hard. Does that mean she can interfere in how the business is run? She can and should if she wants to exercise her rights as a partner, the lawyer confirmed. Patricia felt dizzy. In a single day, she'd discovered that her maid was her sister, that this sister was a partner in their business, and that she had legal rights that could completely reshape the family's structure. Margaret, what do you intend to do? James asked. First, I want Patricia to understand that I don't mean to harm anyone. You are my family, even if you've never treated me as such. Margaret adjusted herself in her chair. But I also want you to understand that I won't accept being treated as a second-class citizen anymore. What does that mean in practice? It means I want to be part of business decisions. I want my own office in the company. I want to be treated as a partner, not a maid. Margaret paused. And I want Patricia to learn to respect me as a person and as a sister. Patricia was battling a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, shame, fear, and a strange sense of loss. Loss of the authority she'd always had, loss of the simplicity of her former life, loss of the image she held of herself. What if I can't? What if we're too different to be sisters? Then at least we'll be partners who respect each other, Margaret replied firmly. On the way home, the car was utterly silent. Emma sat between the two women in the back seat, James driving and thinking through all the implications of this revelation. Mum, Emma finally said, are you going to accept Aunt Margaret as a partner? It's not a matter of accepting, Emma. It's her legal right. That's not what I asked. Patricia looked at her daughter, then at Margaret. I don't know, Emma. I need time to process all this. How much time? Margaret asked. Because 20 years was already long enough for me to wait. When they arrived home, a crowd of cars was gathered at the entrance. Reporters and photographers waited outside the mansion gates. What's going on? James asked, alarmed. Richard rushed to the car. Mr. James, Mrs. Patricia, journalists have been trying to get in since this afternoon. They say there's a video of Mrs. Patricia that's gone viral online. Patricia's blood ran cold. Last night's video had leaked. Richard, who leaked the video? I don't know, Mrs. Patricia. It first appeared on a Facebook page that exposes mistreatment, then spread to Instagram and TikTok. It already has over 1 million views. Margaret and Patricia exchanged glances. The blackmail had become public reality. Inside, they turned on the TV and saw the story being covered on major news outlets. The video clearly showed Patricia throwing food at Margaret, accompanied by outraged commentary from anchors and human rights experts. Another shocking case of domestic abuse among the upper class in the United States, the news anchor read. Businesswoman Patricia Wilson was caught assaulting her housekeeper, who has worked at the family residence for 20 years. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, acquaintances, company suppliers, everyone wanted to hear Patricia's side of the story. James turned off the landline. Patricia, this will seriously affect our business. Our American clients are already calling to terminate contracts. I don't understand how the video leaked. Who could have done this? Margaret, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. It wasn't me, if that's what you're thinking. Then who? Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Patricia, may I say something? Of course, Richard. I filmed the scene last night, but I swear I didn't leak the video. I left my phone charging in the staff room this afternoon, and when I came back I saw someone had tampered with it. Who had access to your room? Only the other cleaning staff who come 3 times a week. Patricia remembered that very afternoon had been deep cleaning day when extra workers came to clean the entire house. How did they know there was a video on your phone? I don't know, Mrs. Patricia. Maybe they saw it by accident when they handled the phone. Margaret thought for a moment. Or maybe someone told them what happened yesterday and they wanted to investigate. Who would tell them? Anyone who works in this house and is tired of seeing injustices, Margaret replied calmly. Patricia, you're not just cruel to me. Richard, the cleaning girls, the gardener, they've all witnessed difficult situations here. Emma nodded in agreement. It's true, Mum. Sometimes I'm embarrassed when my friends come over and see how you treat people." Patricia felt exposed and vulnerable. It wasn't just about Margaret being her sister. It was about the kind of person she had become over the years, someone her own employees felt entitled to expose publicly. Patricia's cell phone rang. It was her partner in a real estate project. "Patricia, I just saw the video. I need to step away from the project. I can't be associated with this kind of image." One after another, the calls brought bad news. Suppliers cancelling contracts, partners distancing themselves, clients demanding explanations. Within hours, the reputation Patricia had built over decades lay in ruins. "James, what are we going to do?" "I don't know, Patricia. Maybe we should consider a public statement, an apology." "An apology to whom? The press? The clients?" "To me," Margaret said softly, but everyone heard. Patricia looked at her sister. There stood the woman she had humiliated for 20 years, offering a way out of the chaos her life had become. "Would you forgive me publicly?" "I would forgive you sincerely," Margaret corrected. "But not just for your reputation. It would be because you've truly changed." "How can I prove I've changed?" "Start by treating me like a sister, not in front of cameras, but every day. Include me in family and business decisions. Respect not just me, but everyone who works in this house." James realized this was the only viable way out of the crisis. "Patricia, I think Margaret is right. You need to make real changes, not just a superficial apology." That evening, the family gathered in the living room for dinner. For the first time in 20 years, Margaret sat at the table as a family member, not a maid. She had swapped her uniform for a simple but elegant dress James had bought her that afternoon. "Margaret," Patricia said as she cut her food, "how did you manage to forgive our father for separating us? It wasn't easy. I spent many years angry at him. But I realized he did what he thought was best at the time. Society in the 1960s wouldn't easily accept a wealthy businessman acknowledging daughters with a housemaid." Margaret took a sip of wine. "He paid a high price for that decision too. Whenever we met, I could see guilt in his eyes." "Do you miss her? Our childhood together?" "Every day, especially when you had Emma. I really wanted to be the aunt who played with her, took her out, who was part of her life. Instead, I was just the maid who cleaned her room." Emma held Margaret's hand across the table. "But now you can be my real aunt." "If your mother allows it," Margaret replied, looking at Patricia. "I want to try," Patricia finally said. "I don't know if I can change overnight, but I want to try." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the following days, the media kept covering the case. Patricia and Margaret decided to give an exclusive interview to explain the situation. When the two appeared side by side on television, telling the story of sisters separated in childhood, public opinion began to shift. "It's an incredible story of reunion and forgiveness," the show's host commented. "But how do you plan to move forward?" "We'll work together on the family business," Margaret answered, "and we'll learn to be sisters again." "Patricia, do you regret how you treated Margaret all these years?" "I deeply regret it. Not just her, but everyone I treated without proper respect." Patricia took a deep breath. "I'm implementing changes in my company to ensure all employees are treated with dignity." After the interview, the two returned home in silence. Their relationship was still fragile, built on decades of hurt and misunderstandings. "Margaret," Patricia said as they entered the mansion, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. You never married?" "Never had children?" Margaret smiled sadly. "I had a fiancé when I was 25, but when he found out about my background, about being abandoned by my wealthy father, he ended things, said I'd never be accepted by his family. And after that, I closed myself off. I focused on work, on survival. And when I found out about you, all my emotional energy went into finding you and watching over you." Margaret sat on the living room sofa. "In a way, this house and this family became my life, even if I wasn't officially part of it." Patricia felt an even sharper pang of guilt. "Margaret, I stole 20 years of your life. You didn't steal it. I chose to come here. I chose to stay. I chose to wait. Margaret looked down at her hands. But I admit I often thought about giving up, especially in recent years, when I realized you'd never change. What made you stay? Emma. Watching her grow gave me a sense of family I'd never had before, and a small hope that maybe through her you'd one day see me differently. James, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. Margaret, now that everything's changed, do you plan to keep living here? For now, yes, but not in the maid's room. Patricia offered me the main guest room and I accepted. What about the business? I'll work part-time at the company. I want to understand how it runs and contribute. I have some ideas that might help. James looked curious. What kind of ideas? Well, after 20 years of listening to Patricia's business conversations, I've picked up on a few things. And over the past 5 years, I've managed the rentals for my properties, so I have hands-on experience in management. Margaret grew animated as she spoke. I think we can improve some processes in the company and also implement a social responsibility program. Patricia was surprised by her sister's knowledge and business acumen. Have you always understood business? I've always paid attention, but I never had the chance to apply that knowledge. Now I do. In the weeks that followed, a new routine settled into the household. Margaret took on an active role in the company, working side by side with James in managing international contracts. Her years of experience in service and organization, gained through domestic work, proved invaluable in business administration. Patricia, meanwhile, was learning to navigate the new family dynamic. It wasn't easy to see the former maid as both a sister and a partner, but she was genuinely trying to change. Margaret, Patricia said one morning as they had coffee together, can I confess something? Of course. Sometimes I envy you. Envy? Why? Because you're a better person than I am. Even after being treated poorly for so long, you never became bitter. You never sought revenge. You kept your dignity and kindness intact. Patricia stirred her coffee thoughtfully. Meanwhile, with all the privileges I had, I became a cruel person. Patricia, you're not cruel. You're someone who never learned to appreciate what you had. You never experienced hardship, never had to fight for anything, so you never developed empathy for those who do. How can you defend me after everything? Because you're my sister, and because I see you're genuinely trying to change. Margaret smiled. Besides, our father always said you had a good heart. You just needed to find a way to let it show. A month after the truth came out, the company had stabilized again. The sisters' story had become an inspiration to many, and new clients sought out the family business precisely because of the resilience it represented. Margaret had implemented a fair treatment program for all employees, including health insurance, meal vouchers, and productivity bonuses. The initiative was so successful that other companies began copying the model. Margaret, James said during a meeting, your results in customer service are impressive. Client satisfaction has increased by 40% since you took over. It's because I know what it's like to be treated poorly, and I value those who treat me well, she replied. When you treat people with respect, they return it with dedication. Patricia was present at the meeting and felt proud of her sister, but she also wondered how things might have been different if she had given Margaret opportunities much sooner. Margaret, do you regret waiting so long to claim your rights? No. Everything happened at the right time. If I had done it sooner, maybe you wouldn't have been ready to accept me. Maybe our relationship would have been based only on legal obligations, not real recognition. After the meeting, the two went to lunch together at a restaurant near the company. It was something they did weekly now, trying to rebuild the closeness they had lost in childhood. Patricia, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you remember me from our childhood? Patricia thought for a moment. I remember some things. I remember us playing house in the garden of Dad's old home. I remember you always defending me when I got into trouble. She smiled wistfully. And I remember the day of the photo when you got hurt and I took care of you. That was our last day together. Dad separated us the following week. Margaret, do you remember why he separated us exactly at that moment? Because your paternal grandmother found out about our existence and threatened to disinherit Dad if he didn't make a choice. She said the family wouldn't accept two bastard daughters as heirs. Patricia felt anger toward the grandmother she had never really known. How could Dad make a decision like that? He was torn between the family that raised him and the family he created. He chose to preserve the future of one of us. Margaret sighed. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand the pressure he was under. Do you think he regretted it? I'm sure he did. Every time we met, he asked me about you, and I could tell he desperately wanted to bring the family back together. But he was afraid of your reaction. He had every reason to be afraid. If I'd known the truth back then, I probably would have been furious with him. And now I understand that his choices, right or wrong, brought us here. And maybe this is the right time for us to be sisters. That afternoon they returned home together and found Emma studying in the living room. The girl had quickly adjusted to her aunt's presence and cherished every moment to get to know her better. Aunt Margaret, can you teach me how to make that chocolate cake you used to bake for me when I was little? Of course, sweetheart. But when you were little, when I was about 10, you always made a special cake for my birthday. Different from the ones Mom ordered from the bakery. Yours was made with love. Margaret was moved. You remember that? Of course I do. It was the best cake I've ever had, and you always left a little note that said, "Happy birthday, Princess," with it. Patricia had never noticed the special details Margaret had prepared for Emma. Once again, she realized how blind she'd been to the displays of love happening right in her own home. Margaret, did you always do special things for Emma? Always. When she lost her first teeth, I left coins under her pillow. When she had a cold, I made her a special tea. On days she came home sad from school, I'd prepare a special snack to cheer her up. Emma hugged her aunt warmly. You were always more than just a housekeeper to me. You were family. Patricia felt tears in her eyes. Margaret had been a mother, an aunt, and a friend to Emma in every way that mattered, just without the official recognition. Margaret, forgive me for keeping you two from having a real relationship all these years. You didn't stop us completely. Emma and I always had our bond. Now we just don't have to hide our affection for each other anymore. That evening, the four of them had dinner together again. James mentioned he'd received an interesting proposal that day. A TV network wants to make a documentary about the two of you, about sisters who reunited after decades apart. What do you think? Patricia asked Margaret. I think it could help other families who've gone through similar situations. And it might also be a way to talk about the importance of respect in employer-employee relationships. Would you be willing to participate? Only if you would, too. Our story only makes sense if it's told by both of us. James added, the interesting part is they want to follow you for a few months, showing how the process of rebuilding your relationship unfolds. Does that mean they'll film our difficult moments too? Patricia asked. Most likely, documentaries show reality, not just the pretty moments. Margaret thought it over. Maybe that's a good thing. It could help others understand that forgiveness and rebuilding are processes, not magical moments. A few weeks later, the film crew began documenting the family's daily life. They captured moments of tension when Patricia still reacted impatiently to certain situations and moments of affection when the sisters managed to talk and laugh together. One of the most memorable moments was filmed on a Saturday afternoon when Margaret was organizing old photos in the family album. She had brought her own pictures, including some from childhood with her biological mother, Helen Johnson. Patricia, would you like to meet our mother through these photos? Our mother? I thought that Helen Johnson was mother to both of us. You were just raised by another family, but she always asked about you too. Margaret showed a photo of Helen Johnson holding two small children. This is us at 2 years old. Dad still lived with us back then. Patricia studied the photo carefully. She was very beautiful and very strong. She raised a daughter alone without ever speaking ill of the man who left her. She always said Dad did what he thought was best for his daughters. Margaret, did she know I existed? That I was being raised in luxury while you struggled? She knew. And do you know what she said about it? What? That she was happy because at least one of us had opportunities. She never showed envy or anger, only gratitude Because you were well. Patricia broke into tears. How could she be so generous? Because she loved us. Loved me, who was with her, and you, who were far away. To her, we were both her daughters, no matter where we were. I wish I could have met her. She passed away 5 years ago, but she left a letter for you. A letter for me. Margaret searched through the papers and handed Patricia a yellowed envelope. She asked me to give it to you if we ever reunited. With trembling hands, Patricia opened the letter. The handwriting was simple, but warm. My dear Patricia, if you're reading this, it means you finally met your sister. I hope you found each other in peace and love. I want you to know I never resented you for having a better life than ours. On the contrary, I was always glad knowing at least one of my daughters was growing up with opportunities I couldn't provide. Margaret always spoke of you fondly, even in the hardest times. She has loved you since childhood and never stopped waiting for this reunion. I hope you build the sisterly bond I always dreamed you'd have. With eternal love, Helen Johnson. Patricia wept as she hadn't in years. All the anger, guilt, and confusion turned into deep sorrow, but also gratitude. Gratitude for finding Margaret, for learning Helen Johnson's story, for the chance to rebuild family ties she thought were lost forever. Margaret, forgive me for all these years, for being blind, deaf, and cruel. I've already forgiven you, Patricia. Now you need to forgive yourself too. That night they stayed up late talking about memories, future plans, and how wonderful it would have been if Helen Johnson and Robert Wilson could see their daughters finally reunited. Margaret, do you think they'd be proud of us? I think they'd be relieved. Dad carried the guilt of separation his whole life. Mom always prayed we'd find each other someday. Seeing us overcome the hurt and build a relationship would be the greatest gift we could give them. And the future. How do you imagine our lives from now on? I imagine we'll keep learning from each other. You teaching me about business and responsibility. Me teaching you about simplicity and gratitude, Margaret smiled. And both of us creating a better environment for Emma to grow up in. Do you ever plan to marry, have children? At 58? Margaret laughed. I think my years of motherhood will be dedicated to being the best aunt I can be for Emma. And if someone special comes along, if they do, you'll be the first to know. After all, I'm now officially part of this family. I don't intend to hide anything from you anymore. In the following months, the documentary cameras captured the gradual evolution of the sisters' relationship. There were moments of tension, especially when making business decisions and their visions clashed. But there were also moments of pure joy, like when Margaret taught Patricia how to make Emma's special chocolate cake. The documentary aired 6 months later and became a national phenomenon. The story of sisters separated in childhood who reunited through pain and forgiveness touched millions. Patricia and Margaret received hundreds of letters from viewers, inspired by their story, to resolve their own family conflicts. One letter was from a 70-year-old woman who had been separated from her sister as a child during World War II. After watching the documentary, she decided to search for her sister and reunited with her after decades. "You inspired me not to give up," the woman wrote. "If sisters separated by pride and social differences could come together, then sisters separated by war can too." These stories made Patricia and Margaret realize their experience had transcended their personal lives and become an inspiration to others. Margaret, do you think we went through all this to help other families too? Maybe. Maybe our pain has a greater purpose. If our story can inspire others to seek reconciliation, then every tear was worth it. A year after the truth came out, the Wilson family was completely transformed. The company had grown by 30%, not just from business, but from the positive reputation they gained after their story went public. Margaret became a respected speaker on family relationships and compassionate leadership. Patricia, in turn, developed a social awareness she hadn't had before. She founded an organization to help domestic workers gain professional skills and learn their labor rights. "It's ironic," James remarked during a family dinner, "that the worst crisis we faced turned into the best thing that ever happened to us." "It wasn't the crisis," Margaret corrected. It was the willingness to change that made the difference. Emma, now 18 and about to start college, had chosen to study psychology inspired by her family's story. "I want to help other families reconcile," she said. "I want to understand how people can overcome deep hurts and rebuild relationships." "Are you sure that's what you want?" Patricia asked. "I am. Growing up watching you two go from employer and employee to sisters showed me love can overcome any barrier. I want to help others discover that too." Margaret was moved by her niece's choice. "Emma, you've always been my inspiration to keep trying. Seeing you grow up with compassion, even amid conflict, gave me hope that love always wins." That night, after Emma and James had gone to bed, Patricia and Margaret stayed in the living room talking, as had become their habit. "Margaret, I have a confession." "What?" "Sometimes I still catch myself treating you like an employee, not out of malice, but out of habit. When it happens, can you correct me?" "I can. And you can correct me when I act like I still need permission for everything. Sometimes I still feel unsure about my place in this family. Your place is by my side, as a sister and a partner. It always was. I just couldn't see it. And now that we know, what do we do with all the lost time?" "We make the future time count double," replied Patricia, embracing her sister. 2 years later, Margaret met William, a 60-year-old widower, who attended her lectures on family reconciliation. He had lost his wife 5 years earlier and was learning to handle conflicts with his adult children. "William is different," Margaret told Patricia. "He sees me as a whole person, not just someone who went through hardships." "Are you in love?" Patricia asked with a smile. "I am. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of being rejected because of my past. Now I know who I am and my worth." The relationship blossomed naturally. William integrated into the family with ease, bringing even more joy to the household. He admired Margaret's strength and Patricia's transformation, often remarking how much he had learned about forgiveness and rebuilding from them. "You've shown me it's never too late to mend relationships," he said. "Because of your example, I reconciled with my eldest son, whom I hadn't spoken to in 3 years." Margaret and William's wedding was celebrated at the Wilson mansion, with a simple yet moving ceremony. Patricia served as her sister's maid of honor, symbolizing the family's complete reunion. "Margaret," Patricia said during her speech, "you taught me that true love never gives up on people, that patience can overcome pride, that forgiveness can transform lives." She paused, emotional. William isn't just gaining a wonderful wife. He's gaining an entire family who loves him. After the ceremony, the two sisters stood alone in the garden. "Margaret, are you happy?" "Happier than I ever imagined I could be. I have a family, a marriage, a fulfilling career." Margaret glanced at the house where she had worked as a maid for 20 years. "And most of all, I have my sister back. I'm happy too. For the first time in my life, I feel like a complete person." "Not just wealthy or successful, but good," Patricia smiled. "And I owe that to you." "You owe me nothing. We saved each other." 3 years passed. Emma graduated with a degree in psychology and opened a practice specializing in family therapy, focusing on reconciliation. Her first clients were other domestic workers facing conflicts with their employers. Inspired by Margaret's story, Patricia and Margaret continued working together at their company, which had become a benchmark for humane management. They were often invited to speak at conferences and seminars on leadership and family relationships. William and Margaret bought a house in the same neighborhood, but spent most of their time at the mansion, which had truly become a home for the entire family. "You know," James remarked during a Sunday lunch, "our house has never been so full of life as it is now." "It's because it's now filled with real love," Margaret replied. "And people who value each other," Patricia added. Emma watched her gathered family with gratitude. "Do you think Grandpa Robert and Grandma Helen would be proud?" "I'm sure they would," Margaret said. "They always wanted us to be a united family. We just needed a few decades to find the right path." "Better late than never," William remarked. "Actually," Patricia said, "I think it happened at the right time. If we had found each other sooner, maybe I wouldn't have been mature enough to appreciate Margaret. Maybe we needed to go through everything we did to get here." "Do you believe in fate?" Emma asked. "I believe in love," Margaret answered. "I believe true love always finds a way to win, even if it takes decades." "And I believe in second chances," said Patricia. "I believe it's never too late to change, to ask for forgiveness, to become a better person." That afternoon, as the family relaxed in the garden, Margaret looked at Patricia and remembered the 5-year-old girl who had tended to her wound so many years ago. "Patricia, do you remember when I fell and you took care of my knee?" "I do. You were crying and I was afraid you wouldn't want to play with me anymore." "Do you know what I thought that day?" "What?" "That you would always be my protective sister. Even after we were separated, even through all the hard years, a part of me never stopped believing in that caring little girl." "And she was right," said Patricia, holding her sister's hand. "She just needed to be rediscovered." The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange. The family remained there in the garden, savoring the peace of finally being whole. "Margaret," Patricia said softly, "thank you for never giving up on us. Thank you for opening your heart to welcome me back." Emma approached the two and hugged them. "And thank you for teaching me that love is stronger than any difference." William and James joined the group hug, symbolizing that this family, built through forgiveness and rebuilding, was finally united forever. In that moment, they all knew they had found something precious, a true family, where each person was valued and loved for who they were, not for what they owned or represented. The journey had been long and painful, but the final destination had been worth every tear, every moment of doubt, every hardship overcome. They had discovered that true luxury wasn't in material possessions, but in the richness of human relationships built on love, respect, and mutual understanding. And so, in the mansion that had once symbolized social division, a family flourished, united by what truly mattered, unconditional love that overcomes differences and wins hearts. The end of the story. Now tell me, what did you think of this touching story of sisters who found each other again? Do you believe forgiveness can transform lives, as it did for Patricia and Margaret? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.